On this week's The Next Interview, you'll hear Kelly Clements explain exactly why your relationship isn't separate from leadership. It's the multiplier that determines trust, clarity, and performance. Now let's meet our host, Doland White.
Welcome, everybody, to the Next Interview Show podcast. I'm Doland White. I'm the host of the podcast, and I'm always blessed to have amazing guests on the podcast to spend time with me talking about leadership and growth and personal stuff. We're going to talk about personal stuff. We're going to talk about alignment at home, about being an entrepreneur and the things, the baggage that you can bring with you home. We're going to spend a great day. So today, my guest is Kelly Clements. Kelly, I want to just, before I describe who you are, start with just some gratitude. There's a 10 million things you could be doing for the next 30, 40 minutes, and you're not doing those. You're going to come hang out with me. So I just want to tell you, thank you for taking time today to do this.
Well, it is my pleasure. There's 10 million people you could have today, and you chose me. So I appreciate it as well. Thank you.
So good. So good to have you. So for those of you that are listening to the podcast or watching the podcast on YouTube, I'm gonna read, because if I try to tell you along, I'm gonna miss what I'm gonna say. So Kelly Clements is a relationship strategist, and relational probably as well. Author, founder of the Entreprenewer. We're gonna talk about that. And you've spent a couple of decades already coaching. You've coached many executives, and you're an author. Over the top of your right shoulder there is a book, Grow Your Business Without Growing Apart. That's such a cool message. That's going to be said. I'm really looking forward to this talk. Having been guilty of inflicting things on my family in my youth, with having my wife ask me, "What the hell are you thinking?" And I'm really looking forward to this chat today. So that's who you are, at least in what I have in notes. If we can, I'd like to just, the guests haven't met you, and as we're spending some time together, just maybe have you take a couple of minutes and talk about your path, kind of what prompted you to do this, and what you do today, and then we'll get into a chat.
You got it. So back in 2004, I started working for an entrepreneurial coaching company called Strategic Coach, founded by Dan Sullivan.
Oh.
And way back on day one, I was 25 years old, and in the season of life where there was, every weekend was either a bachelorette party, a wedding shower, or a wedding. And so I had a lot of attention on the love relationship. And so I noticed right away that my clients that were always talking about their spouse or their marriage as their greatest asset were always hitting like higher levels of success.
Yeah.
Versus those that had marital strife were consistently up against a ceiling of complexity. And so I realized from day one that the marriage was a multiplier. I went as the more driven partner in my marriage. I would go home every day after work talking about all of the things we could be doing, all the businesses that we could be starting. And after 2 kids and many years of entertaining me in that conversation, my then husband said, "Why do you always need more? Why can't this just be enough?" And that was when I realized that we were going to do 2 very different places. And that, so that marriage ultimately ended in divorce. And then in my next relationship, I went for the polar opposite, as many people do, for the more driven, equally ambitious, crazy entrepreneur. And that relationship had its own set of challenges. And so being that I was on both sides of the entrepreneurial equation, once is the more driven entrepreneurial partner, and then the other by default as the more supportive partner, I understand both roles of this journey. So by 2012, I had started my own coaching company. And by 2015, I was all in on making sure the spouse was included in the work.
That's exciting. And for sake of transparency, I chuckled at the beginning when you were talking a little bit. You mentioned Dan Sullivan and Strategic Coach. So I've known Dan for many, many years.
Awesome.
And we've been in trouble together. We were both members of Joe Polish's network, Genius Network. Joe, that's a plug for you, buddy. But
I was also a member of Genius Network.
Where are you? Yeah, I'm no longer a member. I haven't been a member for a few years. But Dana and I used to sit in the room, and Gina would make us sit separate because we couldn't quit talking and paying attention. So we would.
Oh, you're that kind of troublemaker.
We would.
That's my favorite kind.
We'd be in trouble together. So anyway, no, I love the kind of the lesson. I think that, there is, and thank you for sharing that. I know there were some intimate things in there that you talked about.
Sure.
And I know that, in any relationship, and we were talking a little bit about before we hit go to, step into the conversation. One of the things I talk a lot with on my side of the fence is the fact that it's whole life. There's whole life, and what we do out here, comes home with us. And when you're out of alignment, there's a lot of stress and baggage and things that kind of come along with that. So I appreciate your comments on that, and your commitment to help people figure that out and get past that, at least from a leadership perspective.
You know what? Something about the way you just said that hit something.
Yeah.
You talk about we bring whatever we do in business or the world, we bring that home.
Mm-hmm. And
we actually only bring the worst of it home. So as we're in business and we're problem solving and we're speaking to our, our building confidence in our team, and we're putting all of our life force into our business, and then we get in the car or walk out of the home office, and like it transmutes into stress, and our family gets that.
Yeah.
And one of the things I say all the time is a lot of times spouses feel like business gets the best of you, she or he gets the rest of you. And so when we're putting into business our best and then taking absorbing all that stress and then giving that to the family, it's actually, it's a double whammy, because not only are they getting the stress, they're not getting the best of you of the confident problem solving and the confident leadership. They're getting I don't know what's going to make you happy, so I'm just going to be a little bit more quiet right here. And so they get a very different version of you.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. That's really important, because I think that's very true. It's one of the things in my career, I think it's a piece of being any kind of a leader. And I don't really care where you are in an organization.
Right.
Doesn't matter whether you're in the C-suite or driving a forklift.
Right.
There's going to be stresses that occur. And when we come home, the word that comes to my mind is when we come home pissed off or upset or feeling tight, we have that, we bring that baggage with us. It's rare that you come home and kind of go, what an amazing day I had today.
Yeah.
So when you're working with, I want to kind of talk about the process a little bit that you go through, because I think all leaders, matter of fact, I was writing an article about this morning. All leaders, there are stresses that come along with it. And when those stresses come along, there's a loneliness thing that happens. Just perhaps when we go home and we vent is probably the word, right?
Sure.
Or we're not fully present. When you're working with executives and leaders or in people in organizations, how do you kind of, I know there's a method to your madness, kind of as you're working with them. How do you kind of help them recognize, hey, this is what's going on, and this is likely the behavior, and then begin to take them through that recognition process?
So I think the most powerful thing is when they say things and there's others client cases that are very similar, and it helps them realize that they're not alone. This isn't a Doland problem. This isn't something that's unique to you or your business or your marriage. This is something that's foundational. Sure. And so even though they're not exposed or actively talking about it with others, there's other people in the ethos that are having the same experience. And I am a big believer that our greatest strength is our greatest weakness. And so whatever they're struggling with, a lot of times they're just in the shadow of a particular trait. And so if I can help them remember to flip the coin and see where this trait also serves them, it's kind of like they downshift or they upshift into a more powerful gear where they can transmute that trait instead of having it be something that's troublesome to them, they
Sure.
can use it just like they can reverse they can reverse engineer it so it starts to be more of an asset for them.
So when and when you're kind of in that mode with that individual, we'll call them a leader, right? Which can be, leader is a cool word. It's like saying I'm going to the doctor. Could be a
Sure.
podiatrist, could be a chiropractor, could be anybody. But,
Sure.
So when you're working with that leader and you're kind of beginning to have these kinds of conversations, there is that probably that beginning point where they begin to recognize that, I do have feelings of loneliness. I do have these, I am kind of by myself. But I think a lot of leaders, there's this thing I talk about, Kelly, called the 5 lies, right? And one of the lies, very first number one lie in leadership is, I'm stoic. I'm immovable. I have to be perceived as immovable. If I am perceived as movable or vulnerable, I lose power. So how do you help them kind of deal? How do you help them, I guess, deal with that is the word.
So this is one of my favorite conversations to have, especially with the super, super stoic, because I think the resistance for them to heal that, in air quotes, is less about losing. I think when they talk about, I want to, I don't want to lose respect, or I need to keep my position as a leader. I think that's actually a secondary reason. What I find more often is, because I can logic them into vulnerability as one of the most powerful traits of a leader, and I can give them all of the intellectual, and that supports vulnerability. But what's really underneath it that I've found in my experience is that healing that, what I call it the jagged edge, feels like you're not going to be successful if they heal it, because a lot of times that stoicism comes from protecting a part of them that has been wounded, that they've figured out how to turn into power. They've figured out, like, I was bullied, I was abused, like whatever their brand of trauma was. Instead of letting it bring them down, they figured out how to use it as fuel to propel them forward. And what I find a lot is there's a fear of, if I heal this, I'm going to lose my edge.
Interesting.
My fuel, and if I resolve it and get peaceful with it, I'm not going to be as driven, and I'm going to lose my edge. So, that's, I have to start. I think there's a lie A before lie 1 of this belief that this thing that causes their stoicism is also their fuel. And so when I can help them see when they're creating from a place where business is coming through them, they're open to the entire ethos, not just their own personal experience.
Yeah, that's very cool. I think, and I think there is and I would imagine, I'm going to paraphrase this, I would imagine it's probably a different kind of conversation with men and women. And not from I do work with, there's a woman out there, her name is Barbara Annis, and she's brilliant. She does work with a company called Gender Intelligence Group. And we spend a lot of time talking about, when we chat, around the differences between how we're wired. Because we're all wired, we're wired very differently. It's scientifically proven that when a man says he's not thinking about anything, he's not.
Agreed.
Yeah, it's an empty room, no windows, no doors. There you go.
Yep.
And we're happy. That's who we are. But that's why we can't see the mayonnaise. But when you're kind of having those conversations, how do you guide, if you don't mind exploring this a little bit more, how do you guide that conversation? Kind of, because I think there is the way that may go with, there's probably a general principle, but I'm hoping that in the audience, there's both men and women listening in the audience from a leadership perspective. And how do you kind of help them recognize where you are? Because I think that's a really important part, where people have to realize that you don't lose your power by dealing with these things. It actually makes you more powerful.
Yeah. So women do have an edge there, because when women are stressed, we tend to seek safety through emotional connection. And so when we are stressed, it's very, very natural for us to reach out. A lot of times the next question is, who can I call? Who can I talk to? So we do have an edge there
Yeah.
where we have people most of the time in our personal or professional circles outside of the company.
Mm-hmm.
I have experienced women leaders do have a higher fatigue because they just naturally are more giving, and so they might give more bonuses than maybe that would be like the most healthy move for a company. And so those moves can stack down the line.
Sure.
So it really does speak to the power of how well the masculine and feminine energies work in tandem together when they can harmonize. The second they forget that they're only powerful together,
yeah,
and they become enemies, it's disastrous. But so a lot of times when I'm working with women, I'm helping them understand how to preserve and protect the company first and be giving and connecting as well.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful because there's a part in there, and it kind of the tangent that maybe we'll talk for a couple of minutes if you don't mind kind of stepping into a little bit is there's a part of that, I think, that in order to get that individual to move through these steps, there's trust building that occurs at the start.
Mm-hmm.
So as you're kind of working with your client, working with people who you're kind of helping them through this, and I love your thought around the kind of resolution, dealing with this without inflicting harm at the same time, without inflicting, over tilting on the other side. And I think, how do you build trust? Let's finish the thought you just started, and then we'll come back to trust.
When you talk about how you build trust, does that mean like how I build trust with my clients to talk about the things that are upsetting them, or how my clients build trust with their teams?
Yes, and both.
Okay.
Big topic.
Yeah. So trust to me is the rarest commodity that we have right now. Nobody trusts their government. Nobody trusts their doctor. Nobody trusts, their feeds anymore. If it's AI, nobody really knows what's going on. And so I think I think the feeling of trust now is when you have it, it's so apparent because we know the contrast of what it feels like when we don't have it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've actually found that I've been able to establish trust a lot more quickly post 2020 than pre 2020, just because of the split of how much has been revealed.
Mm-hmm.
And so now when we see real, like the code words of real are so obvious. And that's one of the big conversations that I'm having. I think 2026 and beyond, one of the most important skills that we can develop as leaders is discernment, and really getting clear about what's true, where our gut is taking us, where our mind share is. And so I think just because I go straight to the heart of the matter, my trust, by the time somebody is working with me, they already trust me. So that's, I have a bias there. But in terms of building trust with their teams, it's the same way. You have to be in consistent integrity because nobody trusts anything right now. And so you have an unfair advantage because the bar of trust right now is pretty low.
Right.
It takes consistency. It takes transparency. You don't have to vomit to your team. That's what I'm for, or your networking groups. But, it's okay if your team member had a better idea, to give them the credit for it. It doesn't mean that you're going to be out of a job. Yeah.
I think and thank you for that. And listeners, as you're going through it, somewhere on your phone, my phone's tucked away over here in a drawer. Somewhere on your phone, there's a little button that says 30 seconds or 60 seconds, depends on what platform you're on. Punch back and go listen to that again. What Kelly was talking about trust, because I think that's really important about trust and where we are. And it is an interesting time because we are in this weird land of what's AI and what's authentic and what's not. Authenticity is being faked a lot.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we buy it.
Yeah. And, I would say that vulnerability is too. I've actually seen it decline a little bit, but I think at the height of like probably between 2018 and maybe 23, there was just like this vulnerability or oversharing hangover. And so like if, when you're ready to get vulnerable, it doesn't mean that you need to go on an entire PR campaign and plaster it all over your social media of whatever you're ready to get vulnerable about.
Yeah.
It just means that like you no longer feel like you have to edit or manage every conversation to stay away from the things that you don't want to talk about. It can be a very direct people with the people that directly need to hear something from you from a vulnerable position. And so, I can be vulnerable with one person and share something that is personal without needing to go on an entire PR campaign to maintain my global integrity.
Sure.
I think that's an important distinction as well.
Sure. Yeah, it's funny, man, because I think there's that tendency. I think there's a, if you think of speedometer, right, there's that tendency to push that needle over into the red, right? I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to tell them everything. Mm-hmm. And which creates that opposite thing, which you want with people kind of going, hey, maybe I don't need to know that. Maybe that's a little too much for me today.
Yeah, exactly.
So when as you're kind of working with the client and there's a duality in it, right? That you approach, right? Because you're focused on, I make up words a lot on podcasts. Triality. There's a triality that occurs. I've never said that word before. There's three pieces, which is kind of who they are in the organization and who they are in their, in their family, which is really all one thing.
Sure.
So how do you kind of help them begin to stitch that together so they understand, they kind of see that there really is a golden thread, right?
Yeah. I think I see it, I would call it a duality just because I see it more of, I can see your point with the triality though. It goes back to the strengths and weaknesses. If you were to list out all of the traits that make a person successful in business, whether it's leadership or entrepreneurship.
Sure.
And this is always, when I speak and this slide comes up, it's always a place where all the phones come out and start taking the pictures of the slide because it just resonates. But it's two columns, and one is a list of all of the traits that make an entrepreneur successful in business or a leader. They're creative, they're well connected, they're passionate, they're perfectionist, they're driven. And then how those traits show up at home. The passion shows up as anger, the well connectedness shows up as being spread too thin, the perfectionist it shows up as never being good enough. The workaholism or the commitment to excellence shows up as in they're never home. And so that goes back to that shadow, that like where a trait is working for you or against you, and helping them understand, like, when a trait is working for you, life is working. The things that you want are coming to you. You experience flow. You're getting effortless results going through you, as Dan would call it, unique ability. When those traits are working against you, you're in contraction. And you feel like you have a force field around you, like anything's trying to get to you and it's bouncing off and not able to come through because you're probably using those traits against yourself. And so using the litmus test of what is working, like where is the fruit? Is life working for you and it's showing up at your doorstep? Sure. And your traits are probably in line with your strengths. If you feel like you're in this force field and nothing's working, those traits are probably working against you because you're in contraction.
Yeah, I love that. And I think I think that in the art of that, I would imagine is helping them see that and have an understanding of that. Because I think it kind of goes back to earlier in the conversation talking about we bring those things home.
Absolutely.
And we divide, we'll raise my hand saying, yeah, I did that. And we had to implement changes in, this is my second marriage, sacred transparency, now coming up on 40 years.
Wow. Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. I couldn't imagine it any other way. Grandkids and all kinds of other stuff, but another time after podcast, we'll talk about grandkids. But one thing I think that's important is to kind of lean into a little bit, I think, Kelly, is that the nuance of as the leader begins to trust themselves, which is a component of trust. There's a bunch of parts to trust. They trust themselves. Then that vulnerability begins to emerge. They discover the power involved in that. How do you help them kind of craft that? We'll use duality because I follow where you're thinking with that. How do you kind of help them craft? How do they communicate that without flipping that needle over into the red? How does that work in the team and then at home?
Well, when they're always showing up as their best and they're always choosing the highest expression of themselves, it doesn't matter where they are.
Right.
And that's where that discernment barometer comes in of, this is my team. I don't have to share this much. This is my wife. I don't have to react this strongly. And so the discernment of who's going to be getting, what you're going to do with the stress. And that's
Right.
why I'm such a big advocate of either coach, advisor, networking group, where you can have a container where they can take it and not take it personally.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
It does. I think there's a couple of things that you said they're very, very, that are very important. One is when you're there's react and respond.
Mm-hmm.
In the work environment, a lot of it is it's how I respond in the work environment. At home, when you're bringing that negative baggage home, that's a reaction.
Yep.
Two very different kinds of things. One's abrasive. Reaction can be abrasive, can be aggressive, can be all the things that come along with it. But I kind of like that distinction between the two. One thing that, for just, this another sake of transparency part. So early in my career, I was blessed. I was an executive, had a global team, traveled all over the world, been to dozens of countries, blah, 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 blah. It's gone a lot, right? And ultimately, my wife is Irish Catholic Italian from Chicago.
Ooh,
so
spicy.
Yeah, grew up in the city where Al Capone lived. So fun. That's why 40 years of just focus. But one of the things that we ended up talking about to kind of help with that, I'm interested in your thought, is when we came home, we called it a 20-minute no-fly zone.
Mm-hmm.
And it was that opportunity just to do a reset, drop the bags, get present, be there.
So that, I call that the reentry, and it's one of the diciest micro seasons. Like you talk about 20 minutes, it's one of the diciest times in executive or entrepreneurial marriages, especially when there's been travel, because what's happening is you have one person, especially if they're a parent, that has been running the household by themselves 24/7. And they're exhausted and they're like, I can't wait until my partner comes home and I have some help and I can take a break.
Yes.
And their nervous system is ratcheted all the way up. And then you have another person who's coming home who hasn't been sleeping in their bed, who's been eating out, restaurant food, fast food for however many days, dealing with airport security, dealing with airline delays, dealing with traffic on the way home. And they're like, I just can't wait to get home to rest. Their nervous system is keyed up as well. And so the potential for collision there is very high. I love a 20-minute no-fly zone, especially for men, because men need their testosterone to come down and kind of regroup so they can get into family man mode.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they come home and they're hit right away, and from a woman's perspective, rightfully so, I'm exhausted, thank God you're home, I need a break.
Makes sense.
Yep. There's collision. And so when I talk to my couples about reentry, it's always to the person traveling, make sure you come home fed, even if it means another fast food meal. Be fed when you come home. Don't expect, the other person to have something waiting for you because they're shot too. As much as possible, come home well rested. So, the best is when somebody's on a foreign retreat and they've been out partying or boozing all night and they come home hungover. It's like, I just need to take a nap. Like, probably not going to work very well. So spend 4 days partying, but if you can come home well rested, that's great.
Sure.
And to the other person, as much as possible, get the house, somewhat, like it's not total chaos.
Right.
And whether it's 20 minutes or a day of just ease. It might not mean that you're like running into each other's arms, and it's fine. It's fine. Let's get everybody recalibrated. And a quick hack for that is at least a 6-second hug. And so when both people come home,
Cool.
if you hug and you're in physical contact for at least 6 seconds, I've seen 15, but I've seen it, the science that I've seen, it can go as low as 6. But what that does is it syncs up both of your nervous systems. And it just lets you get into the household frontier in a little bit more of a united front.
I love that.
And so it's not bulletproof, but it's going to get you a lot further than just somebody coming home and dropping their bags and why isn't dinner ready and I need to take a nap and no, you take the kids. Like, it can go a lot better if you just have a little bit of a sync up.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's really important. I love that hack, Kelly. That's second hug. I'm a hugger anyway, but we just love that 6-second hug because hugs do amazing things.
They do. They really do.
There's a lot of synchronicity that occurs in a hug. So when you're working, probably last topic, and because we talked about the unelegance of ending the podcast, but we're a little bit from that, but we'll get there. Last thing I want to ask you about is, when you're working with men or women, right? There's an accountability component. Accountability doesn't mean it's not ownership. I owe you, you owe me. It's not that kind of thing. How do you help them set up a system or a process where they maintain accountability to themselves?
So I talk about that as the marriage scorecard. And what the marriage scorecard looks like is there's 2 columns and it keeps track of all of my points and all of your penalties. And so both people are always stacked because everyone's always, I do all the work. I do this, and they pass all of this. And so when we keep track of our points and their penalties, we're always in deficit. The relationship is always in deficit.
Sure.
And so getting clear on the roles and responsibilities so there's not a consistent ask is really important. And I always encourage at least a weekly meeting to check in on getting syncing up on the calendars of the logistics. Are we doing any meal prep or planning? What are the carpools for the kids? What are the social events that we have? And also, what are the rocks in my shoe? And the rocks, when I call the rocks in the shoe or a pebble in the shoe, is if you go on a hike and there's this little pebble in your shoe, it's like, I'm not going to stop the whole hike for this. I can deal with it. And you just kind of ignore it.
Yeah.
Over time, that turns into a blister. And so then you start limping a little bit to protect the blister. And then your hips are out of whack. And pretty soon your neck hurts. And now your whole body is in pain because you've been trying to accommodate this little pebble in your shoe. And the same is true for our relationships. And so one of the line items on a marriage meeting is, what are the pebbles in your shoe? Because these are the petty things that you don't want to bring up because you don't want to be a nag, or you don't want to start a fight before the family party, in 2 hours. So you just suck it up. And pretty soon the pressure cooker is going to go off. And so if you're checking in weekly about what the pebble in your shoe is, it keeps the relationship really clear.
Yeah, I love that. It's that with the stuff. When you ignore those, it will multiply, and it's just a matter of time. And and it multiplies to the point to where there's it's not can be very uncomfortable, or very damaging one way or the other. So I love that, and I think that's it's interesting you mention that, because we go back to the duality. There is that life at home, right? And I love that recommendation. And you young leaders out there that may be newly married, pay attention to that. If you don't do those kinds of things, weird stuff happens. I'll use the word stuff. But so we keep this podcast PG. The one thing I do want to kind of ask you about is, you wrote your book. And it's right there over your shoulder, Grow Your Business Without Growing Apart. And work with a lot of authors. I'm an author myself. There's reasons why we do that. And then there's an expectation that we have for the book. There's a purpose behind it. And I want to spend just a moment or two, if you don't mind, just talk a little bit about the book. Because one of the things that I'll say it now, leaders, you cannot do things alone. You have to have help. Leaders, you have to have help. And books are one way that we get help. So I would encourage you to go explore Kelly's book. But I would like to talk a little bit about the book itself, what prompted you to write it, and what you really would like to see people get out of it.
So the book, I call it being pregnant with that book. I was pregnant with that book for probably 4 or 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And so the real reason I had to write it was I was sick of thinking about it.
That's a good reason.
Totally. It's actually my second book. So I have one book from before. It's called The Power of Play, Praise, and Purpose.
Yes.
And I'm one of my strengths finders is learner. And so I'm always in at least 1 or 2 classes or courses. And so I kept learning more and more and more. And what I learned about as I went through this, what I learned my first book, The Power of Play, Praise, and Purpose, really only spoke to the spouse of an entrepreneur. And it almost put this onus on, I say her because the dynamic of my client base tends to be entrepreneurial men married to women.
Sure.
So that first book it almost put the onus on the woman to fix the relationship. And it didn't really address the responsibility of the male or the entrepreneur. Gotcha. Of what their responsibility was. And so this is part 2 of that first book because it brings online the masculine responsibility that wasn't addressed in Play, Praise, and Purpose.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's really incredibly important. Just a lot of conversations I've had with men, right? Because we get together and talk. There's those moments of finger pointing her, and it takes some unwinding.
So this is actually one of the courses that I just finished, and so it's super fresh for me right now. And I actually learned because I believe that masculine energy is the leader. Every human has masculine and feminine. The masculine energy is the leader or the initiator. When the man has the most masculine energy in the relationship, I believe that he is the leader. And so I always believed that the climate of the relationship would depend on his leadership. And so let me fill in a blank. So when I talked about the feminine part is play, praise, and purpose.
Sure.
The masculine part is provision, protection, and pursuit. And so I've always spoken to my men to be in the position of provision, protection, and pursuit for their women, and that's going to help them feel safe and in their feminine. But what I learned through this course, it's actually a woman's posture. Every day she chooses she accepts she accepts the man, the courtship, the relationship, the marriage.
Sure.
But every day she keeps choosing him through her smile, through her easy posture, through her affirmations. And when those go offline, he's not he can't get to that activated posture of provision, protection, and pursuit because she's not in her feminine. She's shut down. Yeah. And that's how that relationship starts to unwind. And so it really is both people's responsibility to keep the relationship clean and clear so that they can show up in their highest energy. For most, I don't even say most anymore because I think the modern woman has just learned how to adapt and function with so much masculine energy. But when the scales are balanced, that's a beautiful relationship.
Yeah, I love that. There's simplicity in a touch.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a requirement for intimacy or just a simplicity in a touch.
Mm-hmm.
For both.
Yep, absolutely.
There's another whole podcast we have to do together just to talk about men and women. So I think
that'd be so much fun.
I would love to do that with you. So the last thing I want to talk about is your business, because I really love this I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I'll go back to what I said at the beginning of the conversation. Helping people, leaders, men and women, understand this dynamic is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Because I believe our world as coaches we really serve one fundamental course. We help people shorten their journey.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
It's really what we're for. We help people shorten their journey, and my clients get tired of hearing me tell stories. So when we have an opportunity to go do that, we help them become better. And by them becoming better, humans with their spouses in their homes. They're better with their kids. We have the ability to change people's lives. Let's talk a little bit about the clients that you like to work with.
Okay.
Like, there are clients we work with that are great, and then there's clients that's like, nah, not so good.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about the clients that you love to work with. What clients are attracted to you?
My clients are business owners, and their spouse is sometimes in the business with them, but more often they're not. That part doesn't actually matter, because one of my favorite couples does work in the same business together.
Oh, interesting.
But they're not trying to figure out if they're going to stay together. They're trying to figure out how to make their marriage, like, take it to the complete next level.
Yeah.
So
that's cool.
Yeah. We're not spending a ton of time talking about the marriage scorecard or what happened 3, 5, 30 years ago. It's, it's people who are like, we're good. We're all right. But we've gotten some bad habits. There's some distance, and we want to be really connected together.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. I love that. So listeners, in the show notes, I will have all of the information on how to find Kelly, her website, email, and all kinds of, whatever she gives me permission to share, it's going to be in the show notes. And,
you got it.
And I don't share those for you because if you're driving down the road, I don't want you trying to write things down and crash into other stuff. So stay focused on what you're doing. But I would encourage you, relationships. I will say this openly. My relationship with my wife is one of the reasons why I have the power to do what I do.
Mm-hmm. I always say your marriage is a multiplier. A lot of times entrepreneurs are looking for the next strategy or, podcast. Hopefully this podcast is one of them, but they're always looking somewhere else for the next big breakthrough to 10x their business. And I tell them all the time, your marriage is your multiplier. If you can slay that dragon, and you have a person who believes in you and wakes up with you every single morning, patting you on the back as you walk out the door, and you know that they're cheering for you all day. Yeah. Your mind, your confidence completely escalates, and your business follows suit real quick.
Yeah, it's amazing. It brings Dan and Babs to mind. To be
honest,
those two as a couple. So on that note, we're gonna wrap up the podcast. This is the unelegant part, so we're done. But I want to just take a moment and re-extend and close with gratitude again. The conversation that we've had, I think today, is extremely valuable. And listeners, I would encourage you to listen to this episode twice, and for a couple of reasons. The very first thing is there's power in relationships, and there's power in dealing with your vulnerability, instilling trust. I love the conversation about trust. Instilling trust, that propensity that we may have in over-communicating, finding balance there. And then one of the key things is reacting and responding. That opportunity to not go home and use your reaction force inside the body of your house. I think that's really critically important. So
that's great. Thank you.
On that note, I'll just say thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Cool. All right, listeners, 2 things. Every podcast I say this. The very first thing is, on whatever platform, there's a plethora of platforms. Give the podcast a no, like, share, follow, comment. It's nothing to do with vanity numbers. It has to do with how technology works. If you were doing those things, the podcast elevates to the top of the stack, and it's easy to find. When you do that, that helps the second part of my ask, which is if you know a leader who can learn something or who may be facing the challenges that Kelly talked about today, share this podcast with them. It's incumbent on us to help each other to be successful and to grow our lives, grow our business, grow our success, change the lives of our kids, do the things that we do. And we do that through sharing, not by asking. So that's my tip. On that note, Doland White, host of the Next Interview Show podcast. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Grateful to have you.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. Be sure to give it a like, subscribe, or follow, and leave a comment about what you learned. And we'll see you on the next episode of The Next Interview.